What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the KREF High School Huddle here on our KREFSports.tv YouTube page. Remember, subscribe to this page and follow us on all of our social medias on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Facebook as well, as we keep you up to date on everything going on in the world of high school sports in the off season, as we are getting ever closer to the start of a new high school sports academic year, with softball and volleyball just about a month away from getting going. My name is Grayson Singleton. Again, thank you for spending part of your day with me, as today we continue our series recapping the state championship seasons of some of our teams that took home state titles in the 2024-2025 academic year. And today is baseball day. Now, you might be wondering, am I going to do this episode by myself again like I did with Bixby football? The answer is no, because joining me earlier this week was Edmond Santa Fe broadcaster for KREFSports.tv, Karsten Melton, a good friend of mine and a really, really good broadcaster. He joined me on a call where we talked about the Edmond Santa Fe season, where they were at first when Karsten first did a Santa Fe baseball game, to how it ended up throughout a state championship run in the 918, beating Broken Arrow, Piedmont, and ultimately Owasso. So take a listen to Karsten Melton and myself. We had a great conversation. Karsten Melton joining us now to recap Edmond Santa Fe state championship baseball season. And Karsten, I want to go back to March 10th. March 10th was the first game that you personally called for Edmond Santa Fe this year. At this point, they had played, and looking at it, 5 games. They were 5-2 with a loss to Owasso and an opening day loss to Newcastle, who was one of the better 4A teams this year. So when you get there, after that first game, what is your takeaway of this team, having seen them the first time?
I knew just how good this team could be, and I got to see, and Carson Brumbaugh got to pitch. But Carson Brumbaugh comes in, hits a home run earlier, and it's a tie game going into extras, and he gives up 2 runs, and Deer Creek wins the game. It, to me, felt, you've already lost to Owasso, a great team. You've already lost to Newcastle. It felt like a team that I don't know if they're going to get over the hump, because it was not a good loss to Deer Creek. So it was one of those things where, man, it didn't feel great. By the way, at that point, of all the Santa Fe sports that I called, I think I'd seen, outside of volleyball, 2-3 Santa Fe athletics victories. So I was really wanting that baseball one. But it was one of those moments where you needed to see them respond. And when they came into Deer Creek the next day and played against the Antlers, they had a big response. I saw that. And that is what made me think, okay, if they can just start to kind of pile on victories, they just need to start settling in. And that's exactly what they were able to do. But I do think that first game was all about what identity do we have, who can we rely on, and how exactly can we use that to our advantage.
It's interesting because the response came 24 hours later. That was a game that I called, and Santa Fe curb stomped Deer Creek 13-4. And it was kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, I see the vision. Obviously, the talent speaks for itself. Like, I mean, all of these players with their, I'm going to use this term tongue in cheek, but they all have like a rap sheet worth of we know what these dudes are about, right? So so you win the game against Deer Creek, and then that's the first of 8 in a row that they rattle off before they lose to Owasso again, in a festival up in Tulsa. But then you called the last game of that winning streak before the loss to Owasso, where they just curb stomped Norman North, 12-1. Now Norman North wasn't.
That was Blake.
That's right. So you did it.
I got to watch bits and pieces of it from the football stadium about to call soccer.
That's right. That's right.
Home runs being hit from the press box in the stadium.
What's interesting about that, though, is that by that point, they had seemed to have that identity sort of sorted out. Now that you're on this 8-game winning streak, you're past the point where you started out 500, 3-3. What to you was so much different about that team at that point, now March 25th, than when you first saw them 2 weeks earlier on March 10th.
They finally figured out who the guys were in the starting rotation. They finally figured out, all right, obviously we're going to have Savion Sims. That's put it aside. That's a given. Who's going to be the number
He
two?
had, he had also just come back and started pitching too, because he didn't pitch
Exactly.
at the first part of the season.
Exactly, absolutely. And you were hoping that Carson Brumbaugh could start pitching as well, but Brumbaugh, until the final game, which obviously we'll get to, he hadn't really been thrown in there to pitch. So it was just kind of, all right, we've got Savion. Who's going to be that number two? And Carson Cooper was a guy, and you and I have talked about this, who really stepped up and delivered. Carson did such a good job all season. He had total control. And then it was a matter of, all right, Carson's going to be our two guy. Excuse me, who can be these kind of extra guys just in case out of the bullpen. We saw guys like Waitley Kolopek be able to come in there and Aiden Allred as well. And it was just a matter of find your perfect rotation guys, not just for district play, but for these late week games, because that can start to set up what you have to deal with if you make it past, say get to a winner take all regional final or get to a state championship game. It's all about trying to set it up, and they were finally able to kind of solidify that starting rotation.
And they had options too with that starting rotation. Obviously, Sims didn't start the season pitching. That was kind of an interesting thing that I talked to Coach Webb about. That he's just like we just weren't at that point in the process where we were going to throw him out there, because obviously Savion Sims, you're dealing with a whole different dealing with a whole different almost person when he pertains to what's going on with him and being projected as a draft pick and whatnot. So you don't want to do anything that could jeopardize that. But then Brumbaugh and then Aiden Allred is an interesting one, because he goes out and pitches in the state semifinal game and throws a gem.
Yeah.
He didn't start the entire season, except he started in his junior year too. So that whole pitching staff was one that was completely retooled almost, especially at the start of the season from a year ago.
Absolutely, because they needed to find guys to sort of plug and play in a way. And they knew I think after that first game with Brumbaugh, they kind of figured we are probably not going to have Carson. So it's all a matter of who else can they throw in. You saw a guy like Waitley Kolopek do a good job. And of course, they had a Braden Tomlinson able to throw him in there as well. He was someone who could step in a lot as well. Josh Parkhurst had a couple of times to come in, but it was Aiden Allred using his, I don't want to say senior, expertise kind of in a way of being able to figure out where to go. And then Summit Rogers, of course, was another guy. They just had a lot of guys who they were able to throw in there. And being able to throw those guys in there late in the year, especially, was massive for this team, as we both saw in that regional and then into the state tournament with a guy like Aiden Allred. You get him in the state semifinals, you're going up against a Piedmont team where you're like, okay, we're definitely better than them, but it's the semifinals. They just beat, Stillwater. Who knows what's going to happen? And you're able to get a complete game gem from Aiden Allred. It was those kinds of performances that were able to propel Santa Fe.
It's a team that, when you compare them to Piedmont, on paper they were certainly more talented, but we know the game of baseball, and baseball a lot of times is who's hot at the right time. And Piedmont was one of the teams. I don't know if I would say Piedmont was hot, but Piedmont was hot in just finding ways to win, and like they did that well over the course of the season. I want to back up here. You called the Edmond North game, right?
Did.
Okay. So coming into that Edmond North game, they had swept Choctaw, who had emerged pretty much as their biggest competition at the top of the district. I think we can unanimously agree on that one. So you go into the Edmond North game. That was a 9-1 win. But at that point, not only had they swept Choctaw, they lost 2 in a row that weekend to UConn and Mustang, 2 pretty good teams.
And that was out at Enid, and they were supposed to play Memorial. It got rain. There was a lot of rain in the area, but those were a couple of difficult losses for sure.
What was the vibe? And then they swept Lawton Ike, leading up into that Edmond North game. What was the vibe like at that point? Because now chronologically we're at April 11th. What was the vibe of the team like at that point?
Well, it was really interesting because you know who pitched in that Edmond North game was Karsten Cooper. He went the whole way in that Friday game and pitched. I think it was a kind of an experimental game because like you said, Lawton Ike earlier in the week for district, but then you get Putnam City on the back end. And so it's one of those things where those are the two teams who we're going to be fighting for the bottom of the district. I don't want to, disparage them too much because they fought for a lot of those games, but that's just the reality of the situation. So it was just a matter of, can we see our best guys against these really good teams? And having Karsten Cooper and playing Edmond North, you're on a back-to-back where you got to go play Edmond Memorial the next day. So the vibes were, I don't want to say they weren't bad. I don't want to say they were bad. They were in a weird spot of, we know that tomorrow is a big game. We want to see what it looks like. But Karsten Cooper goes out there, and as soon as he kind of shut down Edmond North in that first inning, you could feel the team go, oh, we got this. We're fine. And then they were able to rule them, I believe, in 5, if I'm not mistaken. So it was just, let's just get through the game. We believe we're better, and we'll see what happens against Memorial tomorrow.
I mean, and they lost that Memorial game. And at that point, I think Memorial was running right there with Owasso as 1 and 2 in the state at that point. And then and it's the weird thing because Memorial just ends up just throwing up a donut in their regional. But at that point, they were like they're 1 and 2 with Owasso.
Ironically, it was to that Edmond North team that they couldn't get past Edmond North in their own regional.
They lost to, and did they not lose to Moore at one point in that region, or did they
were a really close game with Moore?
Yes.
And lost to Edmond North again.
Yeah. Fast forward to, speaking of Moore, it's interesting because
the Lions,
your best guys didn't throw in that week in that midweek series, the home and home against Eisenhower, and then you got them in the Edlum series, and then they go back to throwing in those midweek series when they played Moore in late April. Did that kind of throw anything off when those guys go back to finally pitching in a district series on a Monday and Tuesday?
Well, if it did, you couldn't feel it. Because I think what really got the team motivated was what happened that weekend before. You had the Memorial loss, their last loss of the season, but then the Putnam City games, and then there was a 3-game essentially series. It felt like over 2 days, 2 of them at home and one of them either at Piedmont or Deer Creek. I can't remember specifically where you're playing Stillwater and Fort Cobb Broxton. And say what you will about how, it's Fort Cobb Broxton, Class B. Fort Cobb Broxton was a top 10 team in the state.
They were the number one team. They were number one team in Class B.
They won the title. I think they won their 3rd title in the row. They're going to have a 1st or 2nd round draft pick.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's just a crazy thing to think about. And they win it on a walk-off. They beat both teams in the same day and then go beat Sapulpa the next day. But once we got back to Santa Fe after they defeated Moore on the road, and we get back to Santa Fe and Karsten Cooper's on the mound again, you just felt something. You felt just this kind of energy around the team of kind of a swagger in a way. How they started kind of feeling themselves. They started feeling really good. They know that this is the district game to all but clinch that, not just a potential district title, but hosting in regionals. And they went out and were able to dominate the Lions, and Karsten Cooper throws a shutout. I believe he threw a complete game shutout because he's Karsten Cooper. Of course he did. And so it wasn't a vibe shift. It was more of a confidence booster of, we're just as good as we were last year, if not better. How long can we ride this momentum? Because you've got a defending state champ Westmore team that you were supposed to play at home, had to go play out there. Then you've got Piedmont coming up. Then you're going to district. What can you do? And they were able to show out really well.
You take away anything from that Piedmont series? Because Piedmont was kind of the Piedmont. If I had to describe that Wildcat team, because they had a lot of peaks, they also had a ton of valleys too, especially with their hitting. They were the team that small balled their way to a lot of wins. And it was like, if you're a baseball purist, you loved that Piedmont team because that Piedmont team was fun. That team was fun because you didn't know what they were going to do on any given day. But the final district home and home of the regular season was Piedmont, and you beat them in extra innings at Piedmont, and then come home and blank them 5-0.
That wasn't at home. That was when there was the torrential downpours,
yes.
And they played both at Piedmont.
Yes. Oh yeah, you're right.
And Slam, I went up and called that game out in Piedmont, and they're on the turf field. 5 minutes after the game ended was when the torrential downpour began. So we got it in. We're very happy about that. But that's what made it more impressive was you're on a turf field when you don't have a turf field. That's a part of this that really I think people would overlook, but I think was really important is you don't play on a turf field all season. And when you look at some of the teams you played a Deer Creek team that had that turf infield. A lot of teams you played had a turf field. And ironically, most of the losses were kind of on those turfy fields, ironically. So now you're playing a back-to-back, both on the road at Piedmont, full turf field, bad weather, everything's wet. The turf is wet and all that. And you're able to shut out Piedmont in the second game after you beat them in extras in the first. It was just really impressive to watch. And obviously, game two, it's again Karsten Cooper. But what was really interesting about that game two was it was 1-0 going into the sixth. It was either no score 1-0 going into the sixth, and Santa Fe was the designated home team. And nobody could really hit for Santa Fe except for one guy who is a name to watch not just for next year, but for 2027. And that's Eli Parkhurst. Just a sophomore this season, Eli Parkhurst. He drives home 3 or 4 RBI in that game. He's the one who's able to, with the bases loaded, hit one right back up the middle, bring home a couple of runs, had a double in there earlier, and he led the charge to make it a 5-0 victory. Without him hitting, there was a really good chance that this is going into extra innings. And he was able to bring his bat around. Once you saw Parkhurst able to impact the game like that, it was one of those situations where, all right, we've got the district title locked up. By the way, 2 losses in the past 2 seasons in district play now for Edmond Santa Fe, which is just mind-boggling. That they've gone 13-1 back-to-back years. That is insane. But you lock up the district, and you can go into those weekend games where you're playing Midwest City, who's not a great team, UConn, who ended up second in their district hosting a regional, and a fairly good Noble team.
Piedmont, by the way.
Once you get through that season, and it's just, again, the swagger, the confidence builds, and it's like, we ever going to lose again? Who's going to beat us? And once they kind of got they got the regional pairings lined up, then it became, let's go win this regional. We're avoiding Owasso until the state title. Let's go, let's go get revenge in a title game essentially and see what happens. It was just a really impressive performance all around from this whole team.
They didn't lose in regional, and they did it and they did it like multiple ways because Capitol Hill, okay, cool. Like they beat them 10-0. What was that? That game was over in what, the 5th? I guess is how far you have to go to invoke the run rule. And then they clobber Deer Creek to a point where even if Deer Creek is able to circle back around and get to the regional final, you didn't even think Deer Creek would have a chance. Lo and behold,
Oh my Lord.
Deer Creek certainly had a chance, and they had to walk them off in that final game.
Deer Creek ended up having more than a chance.
Yeah.
That was a crazy game. That was a wild game. That regional final. So I do want to start with that first Deer Creek game because you and I called that game
Yeah.
because that regional had to be moved out to Deer Creek because of all the torrential downpour. Both the Edmond schools had to have their regionals moved, but both Edmond schools had to move their regionals. Memorial and Santa Fe. Memorial had to go out to PCO, and Santa Fe went out to Deer Creek. I believe those were the only two regionals that ended up having to get moved, if I'm not mistaken, because Enid still had theirs.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Wasso still had theirs there. Yukon had theirs. Choctaw, Stillwater, and Bixby all had theirs still there. So I believe it was just the two Edmond schools, ironically, that had to have those moved. And moving it to Deer Creek is not a small part in this regional because guess who's in the regional? The
Deer Creek.
Like, that's not a small, just kind of footnote in this regional. That is a kind of not the heading, but maybe like heading 2 below the title of like played at Deer Creek. By the way, keep that
byline almost.
Yeah, just keep that in the back of your head. Like, hey, they're kind of here, but Deer Creek takes care of Mustang in that first game, which felt that first game. I can't remember the full final score between Deer Creek and Mustang in that first game, but it was 11-2. That first game.
Yeah, Deer Creek was decidedly the better team.
Right. In that first game, yes, absolutely. It was the second game that was a lot closer. That's right. But this first game, it was close for a while. And then all of a sudden, the Wolves really started to bust it open. I mean, you saw just however many runs they were able to put across the plate in the fourth. I believe it was 5 that they were able to push across the plate in just the fourth. It was close until then, and then Savion Sims does Savion Sims stuff with the bases clearing double and then the 2-run homer. So it kind of just felt like Santa Fe, like you said, was the better team. By the way, Aiden Allred comes in relief for Savion because you remember Savion,
he couldn't find the zone.
He was bad in that first. I have it written down here. In 3 innings, he threw 80 pitches.
Yeah, I remember.
4 strikeouts, gave up 2 runs on 3 hits, 6 walks.
6 walks, yeah.
6 walks. Aiden Allred comes in, and in 4 innings, he throws 59 pitches, 5 strikeouts to 1 walk, gives up 1 run on 3 hits, which was absurd. And then Deer Creek had Ludlam go, and then had to just throw in a bunch of other pitchers because they were trying to save. Action if they could, but that's another thing about this pitching rotation is Allred. We saw it in this regional, and then we see it again in the semifinal, how he was able to command the zone. The first game was dominance, and then Deer Creek is able to kind of walk away from Mustang thanks to a 4-run 5th inning that made it 5-1, which that one was a bizarre game as well, but not even close to how bizarre the final was between Deer Creek and Santa Fe, because Carson Cooper comes on the mound going up against Grant Adams, which Grant Adams, he gave up 4 runs. It was probably the best pitched 4-run allowed game I think I've ever seen. Grant Adams, because it's not just the fact that he held a pretty good Santa Fe team to 4 runs on 10 hits with 4 strikeouts and just 2 walks. It's not just that. It was I'm going to go 8 innings, throw 120 pitches, and keep my team in the game. I'm going to keep this team in the game because it was a 3-run 3rd inning and a 1-run 6th inning where Carson Cooper, once he got to the back half of the 5th inning, that's where he started to falter, and Waitley Kolopek and Summit Rogers Summit Rogers, another guy who really stepped it up in the postseason play when the time came. But it was this game where you saw how many times Santa Fe kept missing opportunities to tack on runs. And I was like, this is going to come back to bite him. This is going to bite him. This is going to bite him. And lo and behold, here comes the 6th inning in which Deer Creek gets 3 runs and takes the lead. Then you go to the bottom of the sixth, or the next sixth inning. I believe it was the bottom of the sixth because Santa Fe was the home team, or they had to be the home team. And Santa Fe gets one back on a crazy controversial play, which got the whole crowd riled up. I don't know if you remember that. You weren't there, but I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
Where it's fourth, where it's, I believe, 5-4. No. It's a 4-4 or 4-3. Deer Creek leads. Runner at third, and it's a sacrifice fly that's hit. I have it right here. It's two runners on. It's Kolopek and it's Cooper on base, and Eli Parkhurst is at the plate. He hits a fly ball into center field. Atkinson, it's second and third. Atkinson does not go for the home. He goes to third to get Cooper, and Cooper's out. But right as Cooper is tagged out is when Kolopek steps on the plate, and the umpire ruled that Kolopek on the plate before the tag is placed, so the run counts. I've never seen a dugout celebrate and then immediately all want to sprint out and argue with an umpire.
Mm-hmm.
That.
Yeah.
It was crazy to watch. And you had that feeling of, will this come back to bite them? And again, Santa Fe just couldn't put runs across the plate. Finally, Deer Creek is able to get one across in the ninth, and you think, all right, probably coming back tomorrow. But then we watch Savion Sims do Savion Sims things, and it wasn't just Savion. It started with a strikeout looking from Parkhurst. Tomlinson forces a walk on a full count. Then it's a single for Karsten Brumbaugh. Then Morgson has to ground into a fielder's choice, and then you've got two outs. And Hayden Tower had a very good season behind the plate. Comes up, and you're just like, Hayden, all you have to do is get on base at minimum. And Hayden Tower on it forces a walk so that Savion Sims can do what he did. And it was those moments where it was clutch moments, it felt like in the end, for the offense, when it felt like it was down, and then they'd find a spark out of nowhere.
So, you go to state and you're thinking, okay, you might have more of those clutch moments. Well, at state, first round of state, you don't really need that. They completely bludgeoned Broken Arrow. And
I was surprised they threw Savion out there as well against Broken Arrow, but knowing what we know now,
yeah,
at the time I was surprised. Knowing what we know now about Carson Cooper, it makes sense.
Yeah. And then comes the Aiden Allred game, that Piedmont game.
Aiden Allred game.
I mean, this final score was 3-2. You could reasonably classify it as the Aiden Allred game. And again, and we're short on time here, so we'll speed through this so we can get to the state championship game. But he had not started a game all year. And then he starts in the state semifinal and goes a complete game, allowing 2 runs.
I was there watching it because I had to go to soccer later that night and get to call to and get to cover an insane thriller for socials for the state championships for Norman North. But you could feel Aiden Allred's energy every time he got a guy out.
Oh, yeah.
And you were calling it, obviously. You could feel it up there as well. As soon as Aiden would get a guy out, it's like, oh, we're not going to lose. You kidding me? How like that was the mindset you felt from the team. That was excuse me, it was bigger than just he's got some clutch pitches. It was, oh, we're just not losing because we're behind this guy.
And the only thing I would add to that is he shut down the randomness of Piedmont.
Yes, he did.
Because Piedmont thrived a lot on randomness and getting those random things to go their way. That didn't happen in that game. That was, to me, that was the wild card. And then Piedmont also would always have that one guy in the back end of the lineup that could really do some damage before you turn the lineup over. That didn't happen as well. I want to get to the Owasso game though, because we got about 3 minutes here. What was the turning point of that game? Because there was a lot of big plays in that game. What if you had to pick one? What was the turning point?
I don't think there was a turning point. That game was weird. It was just a weird game because, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe, was it Tomlinson or Summit Rogers that had to start for Santa Fe? Because Carson Cooper, we're going to do this now. We were wondering, hey, why isn't Carson Cooper starting against Piedmont? And then both of us see him afterward. Oh, he's got his fingers taped together.
He's got a finger in a splint.
Just bandaged up, right? He's still batting with his fingers sticking up.
Yes.
But obviously he can't throw because he broke his, I think he broke his finger, dislocated his finger in the Deer Creek game.
Yeah.
It had to be Summit or Thompson. I can't remember specifically, but Santa Fe jumped out on Owasso, and Brady Morrison hit a home run, and the Wolves were able Santa Fe started to get in the bullpen a little bit, and then what was weird was here comes Karsten Brumbaugh, and when Brumbaugh came in, Owasso then jumped out on Brumbaugh and takes back the lead, and when that happened, you were wondering how exactly can they come back from this. The team just never quit, and it was just a matter of, can we find enough offense to make Brumbaugh comfortable? And he finally got comfortable late in that game to the point where, not in the seventh inning, but before the seventh inning, it didn't matter how many base runners he got on. It just felt like he was going to find a way out. The seventh inning comes around, and it's gut-wrenching. It's bases loaded. There's just one out, and you've got the best hitter for Owasso coming to the plate. It was one of those kinds of moments where, all right, let's see exactly what Brumbaugh can do in this moment, and he was able to deliver.
Summarize this season in one sentence.
Clutch performances from your Division I commits. I mean, it was clutch performances from Carson Brumbaugh, being able to get big-time base hits and close out a state championship for the final time. It was Savion Sims on the first pitch he sees in a regional final, hitting a 2 RBI walk-off single. It was those moments that were able to define a big-time season for the Wolves and lead them to the second state championship in program history.
All right, big thanks again to Karsten Melton for joining me, talking about the Edmond Santa Fe State Baseball Championship season, a 36-7 year that ends in a title. Again, make sure you follow us on all of our social medias. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter as well. And subscribe to this here YouTube channel. Again, I'm Grayson Singleton. We will talk to you next week on the KREF High School Huddle. Until then, have a good weekend, everybody. Take it easy.